My name is Emily, 33 years old, a financial analyst in Boston. To most people, I lived what looked like a dream, a stable job, a perfect fiancé, and a sparkling engagement ring that seemed to mark a lifetime of happiness. But tonight, in a luxury apartment in the middle of New York, I sat alone in the dark, not because of a power outage, but because I had just lost everything I once believed in. On the table lay the engagement ring I had taken off exactly 10 minutes earlier. Beside it was an unmarked black USB drive delivered with only a note. Emily needs to know this. Daniel opened it without hesitation. Within seconds, a familiar voice froze my blood. It was Daniel. The man I had loved for 6 years. He was speaking with another woman, not his mother, not his sister. A stranger. And in that conversation, he talked about erasing me from every plan, about my family trust, and even mentioned a staged accident. I should have panicked. I should have cried. But instead, I smiled. The man I've loved for 6 years is plotting to destroy me, but he has no idea I just heard everything. Have you ever discovered that the person you trusted most was the very one ready to push you off a cliff? If you've ever endured a betrayal that deep, leave a comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel because what I'm about to tell you may change the way you look at love forever. I met Daniel Carter at a finance seminar in New York 6 years ago. He was a final year MBA student at Columbia, and I had just been promoted to lead the investment strategy team at my firm. I was there to present a portfolio risk assessment model, and Daniel was the last to ask a question. His voice was deep and clear, his gaze sharp, and what struck me most was the way he looked directly at me as if everyone else in the room had faded into the background. That afternoon, he asked to take me out for coffee. I remember laughing, lightly, saying I didn't make a habit of dating people who hadn't graduated yet. Daniel tilted his head and replied, "Then I'll graduate earlier than expected." I couldn't help but laugh, and that was the beginning of everything that followed. We did long distance for the first 3 years. Daniel was in New York, I was in Boston. On weekends, he'd catch a bus to my city, carrying boxes of cookies his mother baked, and a kind of warmth that melted me every time he showed up at my door. Once I asked, "Doesn't this constant back and forth exhaust you?" He shook his head and said, "You're the only destination I'll never get tired of returning to." I thought I had found a man who loved with actions, not just words. Daniel had a way of making me feel cherished without being showy. When I stayed up late working on reports, he'd leave a cup of hot cocoa on my desk. After stressful meetings, he didn't overwhelm me with advice. He simply placed a hand on my back and let me rest against his shoulder. Those little gestures, over time, became a quiet language between us, one that needed no words. After graduation, Daniel was quickly hired by a well-known private equity firm. Things unfolded more smoothly than I ever imagined. In less than 2 years, he was promoted to associate with a stable income and a widening future. We began talking about living together. When I agreed to move to New York, Daniel could barely hide his excitement. "This is when real life begins," he said. "No more distance, no more temporary goodbyes." Our apartment was on the 18th floor of a Riverside Drive building, overlooking the Hudson River. Sunlight poured through the huge glass windows each morning, making me feel like we lived inside a design magazine. Daniel picked out the electronics. I fussed over the details: dried flowers, hand-woven rugs, warm amber lamps that cast a golden glow at night. I've never seen anyone turn a space into a home as, of course. "Fast as you?" Daniel said one evening as we sipped wine by the window. "Maybe," I answered, because I brought my whole heart with me when I walked in. He didn't reply, only squeezed my hand tightly. If there were another life, I used to think I'd want to start right from that moment. We hosted a small housewarming party, just close friends and a few colleagues. Daniel introduced me to his boss, a woman nearly 10 years older named Catherine. She looked me over and told Daniel, "You've found yourself a steady, intelligent future wife." Don't be foolish enough to lose her. Daniel only smiled, resting a hand on my back as if to announce to the room that I belonged to him. At the time, I noticed nothing unusual. Daniel seemed attentive, thoughtful, and never forgot the little things. He remembered what foods I hated. He knew I was allergic to pollen and never bought fresh flowers. He even set his alarm 10 minutes earlier each morning to make coffee before I woke. All of it made me believe naively that this was what true love looked like. Which is why, when that USB drive landed in my hands, whether by accident or intention, it took me a few seconds just to breathe. In the dim light of the apartment we once called our first home, I sat frozen. The recording spilled into the air, Daniel's voice as clear as if he were standing behind me. But what he said wasn't meant for me. His tone was flat, businesslike, as if reporting the outcome of a deal. If the trust plan goes smoothly, Emily won't be an issue. An accident is the least risky option. Accident. He didn't even flinch saying the word. I had imagined countless futures with Daniel. A small wedding by the shore, 2 children who carried both our features, quiet evenings reading together in our living room. Never once had I imagined the man beside me plotting to erase me from his life and mine. I wondered how many women out there believe they're living in a fairy tale romance only to discover the person beside them is the villain. I sat there, tea gone cold in my hand, replaying the recording over and over. Each time I caught a new implication, a detail I'd missed. Vanessa will handle the legal part. If Emily refuses to sign, we can claim she's unstable after the accident. Vanessa. The name cut through me like a blade. She was Daniel's colleague, a young in-house attorney I'd seen at a few company parties. Always dressed too perfectly. Always calling me Miss Emily with a sweetness that felt rehearsed. I'd never thought I had a reason to be jealous of her. Now I did. I should have collapsed. I should have cried. But I didn't. My heart pounded, but my mind had never been clearer. Outside the window, city lights glittered as if bearing witness to the quake inside me. I knew, from that moment on, I could never be the old Emily again. I yanked the USB from my laptop and stood up slowly. My hands trembled, but my heart no longer did. Daniel Carter thought he was 3 steps ahead. He had no idea. I had just unlocked the truth he'd buried for so long, and what I would do next wouldn't be to cry. It would be to fight back with everything I had. The next morning, I still made coffee for Daniel as usual, my hands steady. He walked out in a white shirt, hair still scented faintly of cologne. I handed him the cup, my lips smiling though inside I felt nothing. "You look tired," he said, brushing my hair back. "Rough night?" I nodded quietly, avoiding his gaze. If he noticed anything strange, he didn't show it. Surely Daniel never imagined that while he straightened his collar in the mirror, I already held the weapon that could topple everything he'd built. I left the apartment like normal. In reality, I just wandered the streets, memories twisting into something grotesque. Every gesture I had once cherished now seemed tainted. I started recalling things I'd brushed off before, or convinced myself were harmless. I remembered a spring dinner party last year. I wore my favorite green silk dress, a gift I bought myself after closing a big deal. But when I stepped out of the bedroom, Daniel looked me up and down, frowning. "That color makes your skin look washed out. Are you sure you want to wear it?" I went back in and changed, not because I agreed, but because the silence that followed made me feel guilty, as if I had done something wrong. I ended up in a plain black dress. Daniel smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Now that's better." Or the time he adjusted my collar in the mirror and half joked, "Good thing you're letting me improve you bit by bit." I laughed weakly, but the words stuck in my mind all evening. Improve? Was I just a draft version? I thought about when I wanted to invite my old college friend Rachel over. The moment I mentioned it, Daniel frowned. "She's the one who talks politics at dinner, right?" "So what?" Rachel's smart. I care about her, I replied. He sighed. I just want a peaceful evening, not discussions about the economy. Can't you meet her another time? I canceled. Sent Rachel an apologetic text and promised to reschedule. But I never really did. I was afraid of Daniel's disapproval. Slowly, I stopped calling friends when he was around. Stopped sharing stories I thought he'd find bothersome. That was how I shrank myself. Daniel never needed threats. Just a few suggestions, a look of disapproval, and I adjusted myself to his liking. One Saturday morning, I was slicing fruit when Daniel came up behind me, arms around my waist. Sweetheart, your hair's too long. Makes you look like a college kid. You should cut it, shorter, look more mature, suit your position better. I stared at my reflection in the oven glass. My hair, long and thick, had always been my pride. I like it long, I said. He didn't push, he only smiled. I just want you to reflect. Your value. You're successful now. Your look should say that. I cut it the next week. Not because I agreed, but because I wanted him happy. I thought about all those changes, my clothes, my hair, my friends, even the way I spoke, the topics I avoided. I had reshaped myself so many times just to keep a love that looked perfect on the surface. In daylight, his control wore the mask of care, advice, concern, help. But stripped of that mask, I saw it for what it was, a relationship where only one person got to stay authentic. And I had become a version crafted to please. That afternoon, Daniel called to remind me about a Friday company dinner. Don't wear that red dress you bought in Milan. It's too flashy. Catherine prefers modesty. I paused, phone pressed to my ear, staring into the distance. In my head, another voice echoed, if Emily doesn't sign, we can claim she's unstable after the accident. All right, I understand, I answered, but something inside me had already cracked. I began asking myself, when does pleasing someone else become self-destruction? And if love constantly tries to change you, is it really love? Back at the apartment, I opened the closet, staring at every dress, every pair of shoes, every item I had chosen for him. The place was beautiful, polished, comfortable, yet I felt like a display piece designed to fit someone else's taste. In the dark, I wondered, how many women out there smile through perfect relationships while losing pieces of themselves every single day? That weekend, I decided to give myself a little freedom. I booked a spa session and bought a handbag I'd been eyeing for months. Not to flaunt, not to get attention, but simply because I wanted it. A gift for myself, after endless days of living only to keep someone else content. I had forgotten that credit card was still linked to the joint sub-account Daniel had access to. And when I came home, the moment my key slid into the lock, I felt something different in the air. Quiet but suffocating. Daniel was sitting in the living room, laptop open on the coffee table, the bank statement still on the screen. He looked up, his eyes stripped of the familiar warmth. You spent more than $4,000 in a single day, Emily. Do you know what that looks like? I set my bag down, trying to keep my voice calm. That was my own money. I still work. I still earn. I've never touched the joint account, if that's what you're referring to. Your own money? He repeated the phrase, raising his eyebrows. Once we're engaged, there's no yours and mine. We're a team, one unit. You can't keep acting like you're living alone. I clenched my hands. I didn't waste it. I bought things for myself with money I earned. That's my right, Daniel. He laughed, a sharp, unsettling laugh. You're right? You make it sound like I'm controlling you. I'm only trying to help you understand we need a clear financial plan. I already spoke with Uncle Paul, you remember him? My cousin, the family lawyer. I think it's best if we sit down and draft a prenuptial financial agreement for clarity, for the future. I froze. The way he spoke was too smooth, too polished. And that very polish made my skin crawl. What kind of agreement? I asked, though deep down I already knew. Daniel turned the screen toward me. A draft contract appeared, full of legal terms I knew all too well. I had studied contract law in my MBA program, and I recognized exactly what it meant. The clause about merging premarital assets was never as simple as it looked. "You see nothing unreasonable here," he said. "We'll consolidate all existing assets, including personal accounts, into one joint fund. Once we're married, everything is shared responsibility, shared rights." Fair, isn't it? I stayed silent. Not because I didn't understand, but because I realized Daniel had prepared for this conversation. He hadn't really been angry earlier. He had calculated every step. And what terrified me most was that he used Uncle Paul to legitimize it all. "I won't sign, Daniel." He stiffened. "Why not?" "Because it's wrong. It's not what we ever agreed on. I don't need anyone holding my assets for me. I don't need anyone helping me understand how to use my own money." Daniel stood, his voice dropping lower. "You're overreacting. This is for both our benefit." "No, this is about control." I met his gaze steadily. "You talk like a modern man, but you're acting like someone who sees women as property to be managed." He didn't laugh, didn't dodge. He just stood there staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, unfamiliar. "You're letting emotions cloud your judgment, Emily. I won't force you to sign right now. But I suggest you talk to Uncle Paul. A conversation with a professional might help you calm down." I didn't answer. My mind spun, not because of the assets, but because I suddenly realized Daniel wasn't just trying to control my habits, my friends, and now my finances. He was quietly gathering power, piece by piece, under the disguise of shared interests. 3 days later, I met Paul Daniel's so-called cousin at his law office downtown. A man in his 50s, calm and polished. But after only a few pleasantries, he steered the conversation exactly where Daniel had left it. "Emily, I believe you're a smart woman. What Daniel proposed is actually very reasonable. Combining assets is a way to prove trust in marriage. If you don't trust each other that much, married life will be stressful, don't you think?" I smiled faintly, though my chest felt heavy. "I trust in love, sir, but I don't trust a contract written to benefit only one side." Paul didn't respond right away. He only nodded, then said quietly, "In that case, I advise you to reconsider the relationship. Don't sign if you're not ready. But remember, trust needs to be demonstrated through action." I left his office with icy hands. Not because of a direct threat, but because I realized something. The entire system around Daniel had been set up to make me feel wrong if I didn't comply. I was being stripped from my own life, subtly, quietly, legally. That weekend trip was supposed to be a chance to breathe, to think, to find balance again. But after meeting Paul, I felt weighed down, as if every brick of trust between Daniel and me had started to crumble. I didn't tell him about my plan to drive to the Berkshire Mountains, where I'd gone with my mother as a child, a quiet place, full of wildflowers, where no one asked about marriage, contracts, or ownership. I left on Saturday morning, checking the oil, filling the tank, packing a few bags of snacks on the passenger seat. Daniel didn't ask where I was going. Maybe he knew and pretended not to. Or maybe, like with so many things lately, he only pretended to care. I drove out of the city while mist still clung to the roads. The scenery unfolded layer by layer, from crowded buildings to distant pine-covered hills. I played classical music, rolled down the window, and took a deep breath of forest air. At least in that moment, I felt like I still had control over one thing, myself. But the feeling didn't last long. About 30 minutes after turning onto the mountain road, a sharp curve appeared ahead. Out of habit, I pressed the brake. Nothing. My foot pressed harder. Still nothing. The speedometer hovered near 50 miles per hour. My heart leapt to my throat. I yanked the emergency brake. The car screeched, tires skidding on gravel. the body spinning sideways before lurching to a stop barely 2 steps from the cliff's edge. The door flung open. I stumbled out, gasping, my hands shaking violently. The forest around me was still, as if nothing had happened, except for the acrid stench of burning rubber. A nearby local, an old man mowing grass, ran over. His voice was hoarse. "Are you all right, miss?" I nodded, lips too stiff to move. I bent down, checking the brake system. No leaks, no broken lines, but unease gnawed at me. I called for a tow truck. When the flatbed hauled my sedan up, the mechanic, a man in his 30s named James, according to his badge, crouched to examine the front wheels. He didn't say anything at first, just looked closely, then turned to me, lowering his voice like he was afraid someone might overhear. "Has anyone else had access to your car in the last few days?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" James glanced around, then whispered. "The brake bolts were loosened, not from where. Someone tampered with them, no question." I stood frozen, blood drained from my face. "Are you sure?" He nodded slightly. "I don't make careless claims. Check with another specialist if you like. But I've been doing this nearly 14 years. No one accidentally loosens bolts in that spot, especially not on both sides." I thanked him and took his card. Instead of driving straight back to the city in the replacement car, I stopped at a small roadside cafe. Only the sound of spoons against porcelain and the smell of fresh pastries filled the air. I needed time to piece together the fragments in my head. I thought about the car, about Daniel, about how he'd been insisting on the joint fund, about how he borrowed my car just to fill up the tank on Wednesday, saying I'd forgotten. I hadn't thought much of it then, just a thoughtful gesture. But had he really gone for gas? When I called Daniel, his voice came through as usual warm, tinged with worry when I told him I'd nearly died in an accident. "What? My God! Are you okay? Where are you? Why didn't you call me right away?" I kept my voice steady. "I'm fine." The brakes failed, but I managed to pull over. Luckily, no one was hurt. He paused, then said, "You're sure it was the brakes? Your car was serviced just last month." "That's what I thought," I answered softly. But the mechanic said the bolts had been loosened. Silence, long and heavy. Then he burst out laughing, trying to make it light. "They're probably just trying to scare you, upsell you on services. Don't take it too seriously." I didn't respond. That night, back home, I opened the hood myself, checking the spots James had pointed out. I took photos and sent them to an old friend who now worked at the State Safety Center. Then I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that gave me no warmth. I looked around the apartment, everything too orderly, too perfect, as if staged. And in that silence, one thought crept in, growing louder. What if that accident wasn't chance? What if someone wanted me too disoriented to fight back? I set the mug down, the clink against the table sharp like a warning bell. Some suspicions once planted can never be undone. And I felt with terrifying clarity the real storm hadn't even begun. That night, rain drizzled, tiny drops tapping gently on the eaves like a distant reminder that something was drawing near. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen, my hands still damp with dish soap, when the doorbell rang. The clock read just after 8 p.m. I was startled. This neighborhood was quiet, and no one dropped by unannounced at this hour. I quickly dried my hands and opened the door. A young man in a gray-blue uniform stood there, holding a small envelope. "Are you Emily Moore?" I nodded. He held out a confirmation slip. "Special delivery. The sender requested no name. Just your address and name. Please sign here." I signed, my eyes locked on the envelope. It wasn't thick or heavy, yet it carried a strange weight, as if it held something that would shake me to my core. I thanked him, shut the door, and walked slowly to the living room. The warm lamplight spilled gently across the walls, but I hadn't felt warm since the accident. I opened the envelope. Inside was a small black USB drive with no letter, no note. I sat at the table, plugged it into my laptop. The folder contained only one audio file, named "Listen Carefully Before It's Too Late." I put on my headphones, my heart pounding as if my body already knew what was coming. The first voice rang out, clear as day. Impossible to mistake. Daniel. Vanessa, I need everything tied up neatly. If she's still involved, that money will always be out of my reach. I held my breath. Daniel had never spoken in that tone with me before. Cold. Decisive. Without the slightest hesitation. A woman's voice replied, young, sharp, cautious. Are you sure Emily's grandmother is about to officially hand over control of the trust to her? Positive. The legal paperwork is finished. It'll be announced next week, and if Emily hasn't changed the beneficiary, then I have no chance. She still thinks I'm marrying for love. And the so-called accident? No suspicions? Daniel laughed. The sound was ice. No, she doesn't have the courage to question it. You know, Emily, she always assumes people have good intentions. But if I have to, I'll push the plan further. No blood, nothing dramatic, just enough to throw her off balance, make her unstable, so I can step in legally. I tore off the headphones, covering my mouth. My whole body shook, not from cold, but because every word cut into me, crushing the trust I had built for years. The tiny USB drive sat still on the table, yet it felt like a bomb had exploded inside my chest. I stayed there for hours. No crying, no screaming, just silence, while I felt every fragment of faith splinter apart. Images flashed through my mind, Daniel holding me on weary nights, whispering when I spoke. Of my grandmother, cooking dinner when I worked late. All of it, now nothing but props in a cruel performance. Vanessa. I had seen her a few times at the law firm headquarters, one of the promising young attorneys. I never imagined she could be complicit in a plan to strip someone else's life away. I opened my laptop and started digging. Maintenance records for my car, security cameras around the building, call logs between Daniel and Vanessa. Piece by piece, a mosaic formed. Steady, discreet, unmistakable. They had been monitoring me for months. Daniel didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to erase me legally and emotionally so he could seize everything I was about to inherit. I pulled open a drawer and took out the handwritten letter from my grandmother, written the spring before. She had said, "This trust was never meant to burden you or to be used against you. You may refuse it or keep it, but you must always know you are worthy of this trust." I hadn't fully understood her then. Now I did. I photographed every second of the recording, backed it up in multiple places. Then I called Uncle Paul, asking to meet at his private office the next morning. His voice was calm but firm. "Stay quiet, Emily. Don't act yet. We need to move by the book." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. In my mind, the board was coming into focus. And I was done being the pawn moved at someone else's will. That night, I never turned off the light. Sitting in the soft glow of the desk lamp, I held the USB in my hand as if it were the thin line between justice and betrayal. Rain fell outside, steady, relentless, but I no longer trembled, because I was no longer blind. And I was ready. I left the old apartment on an October morning, before the city had woken, while mist still clung to the streets. I carried little, one small rolling suitcase and a backpack filled with what mattered most: the USB, my laptop, printed documents, and a few simple clothes. No note. For Daniel. No goodbye. I rented a small room on the third floor of an old Brooklyn townhouse, tucked in a quiet neighborhood near Prospect Park. A window overlooked a row of gray rooftops. Inside, a wooden bed, a desk, a bookshelf. Not luxurious, not warm like the home I had built with Daniel, but it was mine. Most of all, it was a place where I could begin again quietly. out of his sight, away from the net of lies. I started by printing every email between Daniel and me related to the trust and my grandmother's estate. I highlighted every time he pressed for details about the contract, every hint that I should let him handle the paperwork to lighten my load. Word by word, lined up together, the picture was clear. He had been planning this for a long time, and I had been blind to it. I pulled statements from the joint account we shared. In the past 3 months, there were shady payments to the law firm, routed into accounts with no clear ownership. I saved everything as PDFs, encrypted them, uploaded them to 3 different cloud services, all with 2-factor authentication. I trusted no one now, not even myself, without solid evidence in hand. At night, I accessed the security cameras from the old apartment. Though I had moved out, the contract was under my name, and so was the system. I replayed recent footage, searching for moments Daniel thought I was asleep or gone. Once, he brought Vanessa in. In just a few minutes, they rifled through the file cabinet where I kept estate documents. She wore gloves, her eyes sharp, pulling drawers as if she already knew what she was looking for. I took screenshots, exported clips, encrypted everything, and sent them to someone I never thought I would call again, Rachel Morgan. Rachel had been my best friend in college. We shared a dorm room at Columbia, staying up all night writing papers, eating instant noodles at 3 a.m. But after I got engaged, we drifted apart. She moved to D.C., then back to New York as an investigative journalist for a column exposing corporate corruption. I still read her work but never reached out. That night, I typed and deleted dozens of drafts before finally sending one short message. Rachel, I need to talk. This is serious. It's about Daniel and possibly his company. I have proof. Minutes later, my phone rang. Her voice was just as I remembered, sharp, efficient, but with an odd warmth. Emily, my God, it's been ages. Are you all right? No. And I can't talk long on the phone. I've moved. You might be the only person I can trust right now. Give me the address. I'll come. 2 hours later, Rachel knocked on the door of my rented room. She wore a long trench coat, glasses the same as years ago, and carried a tote with her laptop, recorder, and a small camera. When I opened the door, she looked at me for a long moment before pulling me into a hug. I broke down in her arms. We sat at the small table, and I told her everything. The USB, the recordings, the shady transfers, Daniel's collusion with Vanessa. Rachel listened intently, never interrupting, only frowning sometimes, tapping notes into her laptop. I've suspected Daniel for a while, she said when I finished. Back when I was digging into the trust system in New York, his name showed up in an internal report. Apparently, he once helped manipulate an inheritance file so a client could seize control of assets, while the beneficiary was too sick to fight. A chill crawled up my spine. I thought about my own accident, the car skidding off a mountain road, brakes dead, and Daniel's unnerving calm afterward. Could that really have been coincidence? But no one had evidence. No one ever filed a complaint. Rachel leaned closer. If you really have video, audio, bank records, this could blow wide open. Not just for Daniel, for the firm backing him. I nodded, handing her the USB and copies of all my backups. She copied everything, saving it to a private drive. I need time to verify. But Emily, she paused, locking eyes with me. If we do this, there's no turning back. Are you ready? I took a deep breath. Outside, the rain still hadn't stopped. But inside, I felt a spark ignite, not for revenge, but because I could not let my life be rewritten by people driven only by greed and control. I raised my eyes, steady. I'm not ready, but I have to do this. The next morning, I went to the office of Mr. Peterson, my grandmother's longtime attorney, who had handled the trust since its creation nearly 3 decades ago. His office sat in an old Manhattan building with red carpets on the stairs and black walnut wood, smelling of paper and ink like a lawyer's museum. He was older than I remembered, hair fully white, leaning on a cane, but his eyes were sharp, unwavering. When I entered, he looked up from his files and nodded, as if he had expected me. "You're here, Emily. Sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. "I suspect you've realized Daniel isn't what he seemed." I sat, gripping the strap of my bag, voice steady. "I need to know, what exactly is in that trust that Daniel doesn't know about?" He didn't answer right away. He opened a drawer, pulled out a brown leather file, untied the string, and set it on the desk. The first page bore my grandmother's name, written in her fine but firm hand: Beatrice Langley, Silver Hollow Trust. When Beatrice set this up, she didn't just want to protect the assets, she wanted to protect you from being exploited. She told me you were too trusting, especially in love. So she added a special clause. "It's not in the public copy, only in this original, stored here and at City Hall, which you've never checked, correct?" I shook my head. I'd never thought those papers held hidden weight. "Mr. Peterson continued, his voice low. "Clause 14b. Very short, but airtight. The beneficiary shall only access the trust if not currently bound in marriage or financial ties with any individual who has been investigated or accused of financial fraud, asset mismanagement, or breach of fiduciary duty." My chest sank. The air grew heavy. "You mean, if Daniel's tied to that kind of misconduct, then I lose it?" "Correct. But only if you remain bound to him." He tapped the desk lightly. "If you cut all ties legally, financially, and prove it, the clause no longer applies. But if he controls assets, if you still share accounts, or if the marriage contract isn't dissolved, you lose everything." A shiver ran down my spine, but then I looked up, eyes hardening. "Daniel doesn't know about this clause, does he?" "No." Peterson's answer was firm. "The version you signed was abridged, standard procedure, but without this safeguard. I did that at Beatrice's request." I exhaled slowly. Amid all the chaos, I felt a real card in my hand. But if I reveal it now, Daniel will fight back. He never sits still. Peterson nodded, his tone like a last will. "Exactly why you must stay silent. Absolute silence. Don't move funds, don't cancel contracts, don't change patterns. If he senses, he'll act first." I understood. His words etched into my memory. From now on, every step wasn't just defense, it was strategy. "I need time," I said, meeting his gaze. "I need to peel away quietly, piece by piece, each account, each contract. I'll free myself from him. And when the moment is right, I'll strike." Mr. Peterson smiled, a mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. "Your grandmother would be happy to see you like this. Quiet but steady. That's why she chose you, not because you were the smartest, but because you never turned your back on what was right, no matter how much it hurt." I bit my lip to steady myself. Part of me wanted to cry, but another part felt as if I'd just been handed something stronger than money. The truth. Before leaving, I took Mr. Peterson's hand for the first time since my grandmother passed. His hand was dry, bony, but unshakably firm. "Thank you for trusting me. I won't let her down." "I believe you, Emily. But remember, not every battle needs swords and shields. Some wars are won by waiting, then striking at the right moment. And when that happens, everything will collapse in ways the betrayer never imagined." I left his office as sunlight broke through the trees outside. A soft autumn breeze brushed my cheek. In the leather bag I carried was a certified copy of the original trust documents. Inside me was a strange calm, the kind that comes to someone who has been cornered but now stands tall, certain she's on the right path. There was no need to shout, only to keep walking. And wait. Under the crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel's ballroom, that night shimmered with a false brilliance. Everything was lavish, almost gaudy, from the red carpet along the entrance to the live orchestra playing a carefully measured symphony, stirring just enough feeling without drowning out laughter and clinking glasses. Daniel arrived in a jet-black Armani tuxedo, champagne flute in hand, his smile polished to perfection in the mirror hundreds of times. He strutted like a peacock in full display, greeting each partner with calculated charm and confident eyes. "We are stepping into a new chapter," Daniel declared from the podium. "A chapter of connection, of sustainable futures, and of love." Behind him stood Vanessa, draped in a tight red silk gown, tilting her head with a coy smile, her hand pressed possessively to his chest as if staking her claim. No one in the ballroom thought she wasn't the fiancé being unveiled. Emily, the name was nearly erased from every invitation, every conversation, which was why no one was ready when the grand doors at the back opened. I stepped in, wearing a fitted black dress, sleek, understated. All eyes turned. Whispers cut through the glamour like pins through silk. Daniel froze. "Emily," he stammered, climbing down from the podium, his face draining of color. What are you doing here?" I said nothing. I looked straight at him, placed a small clutch on the table near the podium, and pulled out a neatly clipped file and a silver USB drive. "Sorry to interrupt this performance," I said, my voice calm, clear. "But I think everyone here, especially the shareholders of Dunham Holdings, will want to hear this." A sound technician arranged by Rachel in advance took the USB and plugged it into the system. After a tense few seconds, a voice rang out. Not music, but Daniel's voice, cold, sharp. "Emily suspects nothing. She still thinks I love her. Once we merge assets, I'll have access to the trust. You just need to make it airtight legally. On paper, I'll be the heir." Vanessa's voice followed, light as breath but dripping with implication. "And if she refuses?" Daniel laughed. "Then she won't have a choice." The room froze. No one moved. Wine glasses hung midair, polite smiles strangled, eyes shifting from Daniel to me, then to Vanessa, who had pulled her hand from his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm not part of this," she whispered, as if to convince herself. I was just the lawyer." I fixed my gaze on her, calm but firm. "Vanessa Morgan, senior legal counsel at Dunham Holdings with a record of altering asset documents. I have your signature on several unreported filings. The courts will find that very interesting." Daniel lunged forward, his voice harsh. "You think pulling this stunt gets you anywhere, Emily? You were part of me. You think walking away makes you clean?" I lifted my phone, displaying a printed email. "This is from my grandmother's estate attorney, Mr. Peterson. There's a special clause in the trust. It can only go to a beneficiary, not financially or legally bound to anyone with a history of fraud." I looked directly at him. "Daniel Carter, your name appears in an internal probe of the Harbor Street Fund. The FBI is still watching. And now, with these recordings, I think they'll be more than eager to reopen the case." Every eye turned to Daniel. No one hid their disgust now. Daniel let out a hoarse, twisted laugh. "You're making this up. You don't have official proof." From the back of the room, Rachel stepped forward, raising her press badge. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. Rachel Morgan, the Ledger. The full recordings have already been backed up and sent to our newsroom 40 minutes ago. Tomorrow morning, the entire financial world will see your words on the front page." Daniel staggered back, jaw clenched. Vanessa was gone. Someone whispered urgently into a phone in the corner. A few partners slipped away quietly. The party wasn't over, but no one raised a glass again. I turned away, refusing to look at Daniel. Before leaving, I said just one thing. "I used to think you were simply ambitious. Now I know you're dangerous." As I stepped out of the ballroom, leaving behind whispers and shuffling footsteps, A cool November breeze swept across New York. For the first time in months, my heart felt light. I walked out of the plaza under the silent stares of the crowd. The golden glow of Fifth Avenue reflected off the car window, lighting my face not with satisfaction, but with something no longer bound by hate. Rachel sat beside me, scrolling breaking news headlines. Young executive Daniel Carter accused of exploiting fiancé's estate. In-house lawyer disappears. The cropped photo showed me at the gala, not the old Emily, not bowed or blurred by loyalty and pain, but steady, defiant. Rachel exhaled, leaning back. Things are tipping in your favor, but it doesn't feel finished, does it? I nodded slowly. Something still caught in my chest, a void not filled by public exposure alone. I turned to her. Do you remember the name Claire that Daniel once mentioned? Early on, he called an ex-girlfriend crazy, unstable, self-destructive. I didn't question it then. But his tone, now it feels familiar. Rachel opened her laptop, typing fast. She could be an old link, or another victim. We spent 3 days combing through faint digital traces, deleted articles, abandoned Facebook pages. All that remained was Claire Montgomery, financial analyst at Belridge Partners, vanished after debt scandal. Rachel refused to stop. By Wednesday night, she called me while I was rereading Vanessa's contracts. Emily, I think I found her. Claire, she's in Santa Rosa, California, using a new name, Claire Allen. She runs a small bookstore near the farms. I paused. You're sure? 90%. I reached out, said I was investigating federal financial manipulation cases. She stayed quiet for a long time, then said, if this is about Daniel Carter, I'll talk. I flew to California the next morning. Santa Rosa in autumn looked like watercolor vineyards bare after harvest, golden leaves drifting down small roads. Allen's Books and Tea sat on a corner, modest, no flashy signs. Just the smell of cinnamon tea and old books. Claire emerged from behind a shelf as I walked in. She wore a dark sweater, hair tied back, her face thinner but her eyes sharp, clear. Emily? I nodded. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this isn't easy. She smiled faintly, gesturing to a wooden table. I thought I'd never speak of the past again. But if you really want the truth, I won't hide it. We sat for 3 hours. Claire spoke evenly, no dramatics, no bitterness, like someone who had spent years training herself into composure. Daniel made me believe I was special, that I was the missing piece he'd searched for. He drew me into real estate projects, convinced me to sign as co-owner on shell companies, moved assets into temporary trusts for tax purposes. Everything looked legitimate. By the time I realized it was too late, he vanished with Vanessa. She handled every contract. I clenched my fists. Did you ever go to anyone? Police, media. Claire shook her head, eyes dimming. I had nothing left. Lost my money, my reputation, my friends. My family, they didn't believe me after the press painted me as unstable. Vanessa even testified I forged my own signature. Can you believe that? My jaw tightened. I believe you. Claire pressed her lips together, then disappeared into the back room. She returned with a small box. I didn't think I'd kept these, but I photographed every document I sent to lawyers before I gave up. She slid a USB across the table. If you want to expose them, this is what you need. I looked at Claire. In that moment, no words were needed. I understood she had been pushed to the edge of despair and only hoped others might escape what she couldn't. Rachel verified the files within 2 days. They're real. Vanessa authorized 3 fraudulent trusts for Daniel. 2 flagged as potential money laundering, but the cases were internally frozen with her own petitions to legalize them. I stared at the screen, then slowly nodded. Enough. We're bringing this into the light. And not just to the press. Rachel tilted her head. You mean the courts? No, the Securities and Exchange Commission. I glanced out the window. Rain had just begun to fall softly on the street, but inside me the fog was clearing, replaced by something piercing and cold, the truth. And once it was exposed, none of them would have anywhere left to hide. Here is the next chapter of the story, following perfectly with part 10, the decisive strike. The Manhattan office tower gleamed, with lights as always. But no one inside knew today was the day everything would collapse for Daniel. I sat in a black SUV parked across the street, flanked by two FBI agents. One wore a blue shirt, his face stern, hand resting lightly on the grip of his holstered gun. Rachel sat beside me, eyes fixed on the entrance, holding herself back from exploding with rage. In her lap was a sealed brown folder inside, irrefutable proof of Daniel's crimes. Illegal transfers, falsified financial records, psychological intimidation, and calculated attempts to seize another's estate through a marriage of intent. He's about to exit the elevator. Agent Simmons' voice came through the earpiece from inside the building. Prepare to engage. Keep it clean. Seconds later, I saw Daniel stroll out of the lobby, laughing with a man in a tailored suit, likely a new investor he was trying to lure with his facade of success. Long overcoat, Rolex watch, that polished smile, but I felt no fear. I had once believed myself weak, once believed he loved me. But no, everything had been deliberate. And now it was time for him to pay. Daniel Carter, you are under arrest for federal financial fraud, conspiracy to seize assets through marriage, psychological abuse, and suspected conspiracy to commit murder. An agent stepped from behind a column, reading him his rights while snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Daniel's face froze like stone. He looked around, stammering, "You're joking, right? This is a mistake." But no one laughed. Bystanders filmed the scene, and within hours, clips spread across Twitter and online news with headlines. Attorney Daniel Carter arrested at office. Financial scandal exposed. The trial began 3 weeks later. The Southern District Federal Court of New York was packed with reporters and families of victims. I sat in the waiting room, clutching the file I had spent months compiling. Rachel entered, giving me a firm nod. Claire exhaled shakily at the sight of me. "Ready?" Rachel asked. I nodded. The three of us walked into the courtroom together. Across the aisle sat Daniel, no tailored suit, no calm smile. His eyes, when they met mine, were no longer mocking, but frantic, powerless. The prosecutor read the charges, each count sharp as a blade. Illegal transfers from investor accounts, falsified prenuptial contracts, coercive psychological abuse, conspiracy to seize estate assets through marriage. First witness, Miss Emily Harrington. I rose, walking steadily to the stand. Behind me were Rachel and Claire, women scarred but unbroken. I spoke clearly, detailing everything: the USB I had uncovered, Vanessa's involvement, the evidence of Daniel's schemes within his firm. I presented recordings, restored emails, even legal documents he had tried to force me to sign. When Rachel took the stand, she held nothing back. She revealed shell companies Daniel and Vanessa used for laundering, recordings of Vanessa threatening employees if they refused to comply. Finally, Claire's voice trembled but did not break. She described her years in New York, how Daniel charmed her as he had me, stripped her of assets, left her bankrupt, forcing her into exile under a false name for 6 years. When she finished, the courtroom fell silent. Daniel slumped in his chair, head bowed, no fight left. A week later, I was called to Attorney Peterson's office, the longtime custodian of my grandmother's trust. "Emily," he said, voice steady and solemn. "After full review, the trust has been formally activated. You are now the sole legal beneficiary. but I understand you plan to use the funds differently? I met his eyes, nodding gently. I'll keep a small portion for stability, but the majority? I want to create an organization, the Foundation for Women's Justice. So women like me or like Claire will have a place to turn when they have nowhere else. Peterson allowed himself a rare smile, his eyes misting. Your grandmother would be proud. Months later, I stepped onto the stage at a financial and women's rights conference where the Foundation for Women's Justice was being launched. In the vast hall filled with faces who had endured control, abuse, and the loss of careers simply because they were women, I stood tall, unflinching under the lights, unafraid of the cameras. I saw Claire in the front row, Rachel beside her, sharp smile, unyielding eyes. I drew a breath and spoke. I was betrayed, threatened, and nearly stripped of everything, but I did not fall. I stand here today not because I was luckier than others, but because I chose to rise, to fight, and not to remain silent. I paused, letting my eyes sweep the room. No one has the right to strip us of our value or dignity simply because they hold power or money. The Foundation for Women's Justice exists to prove, even if you've been broken, you can rebuild. Even if you've been silent, you can speak. I smiled, tears glimmering like crystal in the spotlight. I did not just survive, I reclaimed myself. I stepped down from the stage to thunderous applause, but within me was a quiet peace, a stillness I had never felt in all the years consumed by deceit and control. I was no longer the woman crying alone in a bedroom, trembling at the ping of a toxic husband's text. I was no longer the pawn lured by sweet words masking schemes of theft. Now, I was myself, no apologies for strength, no bowing because someone thought me too much. Yet, I knew, I was not the only one who had walked through that darkness. Perhaps you, listening to my story now, recognize a part of yourself in these memories. Perhaps you too were betrayed by someone you loved. Perhaps you stayed silent, thinking speaking out would only make things worse. But please remember this. Sometimes the worst thing we can do is remain silent. If you've faced something similar or have thoughts on the journey I've shared, I invite you to leave a comment below. I'll read every word, because I believe our stories, when spoken aloud, can light the way for others. And if you'd like to walk with me further to uncover more true stories of family, trust, and the wounds we carry, please hit follow on this channel. Life isn't always gentle, but each step through pain can become a new chapter of hope. The stories ahead might be mine, yours, or someone sitting quietly out there, waiting to be heard. Thank you for being here, truly. We still have so much to share, and so much to begin again.